So there's this proposal floating around. Should Pakistani soldiers be sent to join an international stabilization force in Gaza after the conflict? Now, on the surface, that sounds like a noble goal, right? A simple contribution to peace. But as we're about to break down, the strategic reality is way more complicated and honestly, a lot more dangerous.
And this really gets to the heart of the matter. This is the central question that frames this entire explainer. You see, the debate isn't just about peacekeeping. It's about whether Pakistan's military could end up being used as a tool for another country's agenda. Okay, so this plan for an International Stabilisation Force, or ISF, it sounds pretty straightforward. Go in, bring order after the fighting dies down. But the analysis we're digging into today shows that what's hiding just beneath the surface is a very different story. And look, to really get a handle on the risks here, we have to understand the single most critical distinction in this whole scenario. And that's the difference between peacekeeping and peace enforcement. They might sound almost the same, but in military operations, trust me, they're universes apart.
When you think of traditional UN blue helmets, you're thinking of a mission that's based on consent from everybody involved. They're neutral referees, right? They operate under a clear UN mandate, and their job is to help keep a peace that's already been agreed on. The key thing to understand is that this proposed mission in Gaza, it is not that, not even close.
Yeah, this mission is completely different. We're not talking about a neutral UN-led operation based on everyone agreeing. What's on the table is a partisan US-led operation that actually requires Israeli approval. That just fundamentally changes the entire game. This isn't about keeping the peace, it's about enforcing a peace.
And that fundamental difference creates what the analysis calls two fatal flaws, right from the get-go. A dangerously vague mandate and a complete lack of consent from one of the key players. So this vague mandate leaves some absolutely critical questions just hanging in the air. First up, who's actually in charge on the ground? The United States? Some kind of coalition commander? The plan is silent. Next, and this is a big one. Who sets the rules of engagement? Who gets to decide when and how these soldiers are allowed to use lethal force? I mean, this is one of the most vital questions for any military deployment, and here, there's just no answer.
And that leads to maybe the most serious question of all. When things inevitably go wrong and civilians get killed, who's held accountable? Is it the nation that sent the troops? The force commander? The lack of clarity on this is it's profound.
Because of all this ambiguity, the analysis delivers a really harsh but very clear verdict. Sending your soldiers into such a poorly defined mission isn't just a risk, it's flat-out military negligence. All right, so that brings us to the second fatal flaw, consent. Look, in any kind of peace operation, you have to have buy-in from the people on the ground. But in this case, Hamas, a primary party in this conflict, has publicly and very explicitly said no, calling this force non-neutral from the very beginning.
And the consequence of that is critical. Without consent, the whole nature of the mission changes. The force is no longer a neutral stabilizer, it becomes a combatant, an active player in the conflict. And for Pakistan, that would mean its soldiers would find themselves fighting Palestinians, not keeping a peace.
But beyond these, operational flaws, the analysis points to even deeper geopolitical traps. This is where we start to uncover what's being called the Israel factor and the hidden and very high price of recognition. The source we're looking at argues that Israel's own track record presents a massive risk. It points to a history of violating ceasefires and even firing on UN peacekeepers. And then it poses this critical question. What happens if Israeli forces fire on or near Pakistani troops? Suddenly, Pakistan would be completely cornered with no good options, neither militarily nor diplomatically.
And then there's what's being called the recognition trap. It works like this. Participating in this force would mean direct coordination with Israeli forces. That coordination, just by its very nature, would equal a de facto recognition of Israel from Pakistan, which would basically collapse the country's long-held principled stance on Palestine.
So what would Pakistan get in return for this huge foreign policy U-turn?
Well, according to this analysis, nothing. No Palestinian state, no end to the occupation. It would be, in the source's really stark terms, a strategic surrender without any compensation at all.
So let's bring this all back home, because these international games would have incredibly severe consequences inside Pakistan. The analysis is pretty clear that domestic political blowback isn't just a risk here, it's pretty much an inevitability.
I mean, just imagine this headline flashing across news channels in Pakistan. The public outrage would be absolutely immense.
Any government that was seen as responsible for putting its soldiers in that position would face a political crisis of epic proportions.
Or think about this one. The very idea of Pakistani soldiers operating under U.S. command, enforcing the disarmament of fellow Muslims in Gaza, that would trigger an enormous public and religious backlash, creating just severe instability.
So when you put it all together, the flawed mandate, the lack of consent, the geopolitical traps, the guaranteed domestic fallout, the analysis arrives at its final and frankly ruthless assessment. And this isn't a moral plea, it's presented as a cold, hard calculation of statecraft.
And the verdict is just unequivocal. From a military point of view, it's reckless. Politically, it's suicidal for any government that would approve it. Morally, it's pretty much indefensible. And most importantly, from a pure strategic standpoint, it's just plain irrational.
The ultimate bottom line really is that simple. This proposal is all risk and no reward. Pakistan would be taking on catastrophic risks to its soldiers, to its government, to its foreign policy for absolutely nothing tangible in return. No security benefit, no economic payoff, no strategic gain.
And that leaves us with this final, powerful idea from the analysis. In a situation this complex, this dangerous, the wisest strategic move isn't always to act, but sometimes it's to refuse to act. A decision to stay out of this quagmire wouldn't be a sign of weakness, but a demonstration of shrewd, sober statecraft.